Welcome to Eggs, the podcast, featuring the best and brightest minds in business leadership, entrepreneurship, and technology. Today, we are thrilled to have special guest Alan Siebenaler, a 22-year veteran real estate agent and investor. To say that Alan's investing career has been an easy one would be a flat-out lie. Over the years, Alan has managed to survive a hurricane that nearly destroyed a 48-unit property in Texas, took on gangs at his affordable housing project in Chicago, and so much more. However, despite the many challenges, his real estate investments have paid off big, achieving single transaction profits of more than $1 million. Today, he'll be sharing his secrets on how to take advantage of the market as a real estate investor, even when the market sucks, seller financing and creative financing tips for buying properties without banks, and how to retire in 5 years with real estate investing. Get ready to learn from one of the best in the business. Join us in welcoming to the show, Alan Siebenaler. Hey, Alan, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, let's get started in this conversation just by learning a little bit more about you. Do you mind sort of telling us about your background, and sort of how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been both a real estate investor and a real estate agent for 22 years. I've invested in 9 different states. I live in California. And just been quite a journey, all kinds of stories, all kinds of lessons learned. I'm excited to unpack some of it with you.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, and we were talking a little bit before the show, but I'm really excited for this conversation because I think you're the first real estate investor we've had on the show in sort of the modern era, which is dramatically different from what it was just even a couple of years ago. So I'm really excited to dig into that with you.
So you mentioned you were a real estate agent first and then an investor second. Can you tell us how that helped you become a better investor?
Yeah, I basically wanted to get on the investment side. I was really inspired by the whole Rich Dad, Poor Dad book. And, that was a long time ago. That was 23 years ago that I read that. And I wanted to get on the investing side. And one of the strategies I decided to do that was to get my license. And actually, I got a job in commercial real estate. So I was working primarily, my clients were investors. And I thought that was the perfect way to learn, was to be out there on the street with investors who have been doing it for a long time. And I learned a ton. I didn't make a lot of money working, getting started in commercial real estate is really a tough grind. But I learned a ton, which was more valuable than the money. And I then eventually branched off of the team I was on out into my own and started doing both commercial and residential as an agent. And my wife and I, in the meantime, were managing apartment buildings. This was in Santa Monica, California, beachside community of Los Angeles, and it's a really expensive rent. And so to save on the rent, we would live in an apartment building and manage the building for the investors that owned it. We were like the resident managers. And by doing that, I was also getting experience managing maintenance, managing leasing, and then got, cheap rent and eventually worked our way towards getting free rent. And so that was a great way to get started.
My cousin actually does that. She manages a storage unit for the investors and gets the cheap reduced rent and same kind of thing. So I relate to that. That's pretty cool.
Well, and what a great idea in a market like Santa Monica. I mean, if you can score cheap or free rent in Santa Monica, that's the way to do it. So,
yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about then, maybe even going back a little bit further, let's talk about sort of, obviously you were already in real estate, but you read the Rich Dad, Poor Dad book. Obviously you were looking for a change in the way that you were doing life or business or money management or whatever. And at some point you had to make a transition from having read the book to acting on that advice. And this is something Mike's probably exhausted of hearing me talk about because it's come up in like the last dozen episodes, because I'm really trying to crack the nut on this read and then apply thing. Because I think that, a lot of people, myself included, do a lot of reading, but tend not to ever really act on the advice. We have the knowledge, we know the things, we've learned the stuff, but we never actually do anything with it.
I would actually
I'm fascinated by people.
I would add on to that too. I would add on to this point that the action and actual doing in real estate is a little bit more high risk. So taking that first step is a little daunting for people who haven't done it before. So maybe
for sure,
talk about your first deal and your first kind of like, oh crap, I just jumped off the cliff.
Absolutely. Yeah, I remember that first deal like it was yesterday. So we were doing the management gig. We were saving up some money, and we were moving towards buying our first place in Culver City, which is, I guess at the time it was a bit of a step down in price from Santa Monica, from where we lived, and it wasn't as nice as it is now. And we got approved for zero down financing. This was back
Back
when,
2006.
yeah, it was 2001 to be exact.
Oh, okay.
2001, we got approved for zero down financing, and we were so excited. We found this condo, and it had great bones to it. Essentially, it had a good layout. It had 2 patio decks. It had a good kind of open sort of layout that we really liked. And we made an offer, and it got accepted. And we were just, totally pumped. And then we go through kind of the whole escrow period. And about 5 days before close, US Bank calls us and says, "Hey, we just figured out that you don't actually qualify for the zero down financing. You now need to put 5% down." And at the time, we completely freaked out. We did not have 5% down. It was a $180,000 purchase then, and that was $9,000 that we did not have. I scraped together 3,000 we had in savings, and then I realized that by purchasing the condo, we would also save a bunch of money in our taxes, and I did have a little bit of tax savings set aside, so that was about another 3,000. So I scraped together 6,000, and I was 3,000 short, and I was just sweating. And grandma of all people heard about it and gave us a call and said, "Sweetie, I'm going to loan you 3,000, and really you don't ever have to pay me back." And so we pulled together this $9,000 and pulled it off. But I won't tell you that we weren't scared to death. And it was really, I learned my lesson about lenders, to really be careful, because to pull the rug under us last minute like that is not cool. You can risk your deposit you have in escrow. Just a lot of things can go wrong. But we were able to pull it together and pull it off, and that was a bit of a fixer as well. And we lived in it and fixed it ourselves, and had some friends helping us. So it was that whole deal with our first property. But it was so exciting. We fixed it up, lived in it for a while. Then we moved out of it. We moved back into property management, living in an apartment building for free rent. And we rented that condo out and kept it. And that started our journey as investors.
That's what I was going to ask you is, when you buy your first property as a place to live, that's not the income that you want to generate. You're spending for that. And so to be able to fix it up while you're there, essentially that's your rent, and then have another place to get to, that's really cool, being able to jump around like that and be able to have a place to put your family while you turn it into an investment property.
Yes.
So how long after that did you wait to buy your next property? Like, because that's the idea,
Yeah.
right? You want multiple.
Yes. Yeah. It was a few years. And honestly, it was just sometimes our situations that we're in get really, really uncomfortable. Things go wrong, to put it bluntly. And that forces that position of being uncomfortable forces us to look at things that we maybe normally wouldn't have looked at, and helps us kind of get to that next level. And that's exactly what happened. Is we were managing these buildings in this area called Miracle Mile in Los Angeles. And the guy that owned these buildings was crazy, and he was just really old, and he was the stereotypical grumpy old man, and he hated most people, and they hated him, and he started like doing weird stuff, like spying on us with his maintenance guy. He told me that I couldn't really take days off. Like, I think he was losing it. And so it just didn't feel like home anymore, and we got really uncomfortable. We started to think, well, where are we going to go? What are we going to move? And so I started thinking about, well, maybe we could buy again. And we pulled pulled some things together. I was able to pull equity now out of that condo because it had gone up in value. And I will say, because we were investing in California, a lot of the investment gain was appreciation. It wasn't necessarily cash flow. So we rented that condo out and it covered itself, maybe made a little bit, a few dollars extra cash flow, which probably be wiped out by various maintenance things, but it was pretty much break even. But over those years, it went up significantly in value. So someone else was covering all of our expenses on it while it went up in value. And then we were eventually able to pull some of that equity out. And this was a bank that no longer exists called Washington Mutual. And it was crazy because I walked in, I said, hey, I want to pull equity out of my condo. They said, okay, no problem. Come back in 2 weeks. I came back in 2 weeks and they handed me a check for $70,000. I don't even think someone even went to the condo. I think they just like clicked some things on their computer and handed me. And I stood there and looked at this. I'd never earned that much money probably in a whole year at that point in my life. I looked at that check and I thought, oh my God, I could go like buy a Porsche or something. And that's what some people did back then. That was 2004. So think about Washington Mutual handing people all these checks, and then they went and they spent it on cars, cruises, vacations, all this stuff where they're not getting any investment value back. They blew the money, and then their homes were all, leveraged to the tilt. And then 2006 and 7 happened and all those homes got wiped out. And then I was on the backside picking them up at foreclosure auctions. But fortunately, I was smart enough and I've made a lot of mistakes, but I was smart enough to take that 70,000 and I put it into a multi-unit property. I bought a 4-unit, and I was able to get 10% down. And then as an agent, I represented myself. So I got a kickback on the commission. And we moved into one of the units. And then we slowly fixed that 4-unit up, made it more desirable because it was pretty run down, and the rents went up on it. And that was our next move. And it was just really an uncomfortable situation that forced me into thinking bigger.
Yeah, it's so smart. And I mean, your story there, I think probably illustrates why Washington Mutual is no longer around.
I was going to say the same thing.
They were one of my banks back at the time too. I had
That's
this
it.
bank for a while.
That's it.
Before they disappeared. I think your story is really interesting, and I like the way that you're going through it sort of in terms of growth, because like I think for a lot of people, they hear these types of people come on different podcasts and they hear the stories of investing and all the riches and all the stuff, that comes. And I think that there's this impulse that we must jump right in and be able to buy a big property. I even like that you're talking about having to buy kind of a fixer upper, it's like you didn't run out and buy something that was already perfect, and so I think that this makes it feel maybe a little less intimidating to your average listener, So yeah. Can you talk about, though, as you're trying to make decisions on some of these properties, and as best as you can, maybe in those early days or more in the way that you might advise somebody today, what sorts of things are you looking for in a desirable property? Like how would I go about picking something that was, reasonable? I mean, if I'm shopping only for something that's, a fixer upper, that might do one thing, and maybe buying something that's too nice does another. So I wonder if you maybe just have some, fundamental technique that you could
absolutely
share here.
It's the 2 words, value add, right? And we're looking for that, whether you're looking at businesses to invest in or you're looking at real estate. You're looking at how the nice thing about real estate is, as opposed to a business that someone else owns, is I'm going to own it. So I have full control. I have full control of adding the value to this piece of real estate. So I'm looking for where can I do that? How can I do that? And let me take one step back, because it is intimidating. It's always intimidating, but you learn as you go, and you learn by taking action. And when you get into a situation where you don't know what to do, you can hire people to come in and teach you. Like I got into situations, I'll give you just a stupid one. I got into a situation where this kitchen, the garbage disposal stopped working. And I was just totally frustrated and stressed out. And so I didn't know how to deal with the garbage disposal. So I hired a plumber, and he came out, and I think he looked at the garbage disposal, and he took out an Allen wrench and stuck it underneath and turned it. And the garbage disposal was just jammed, and he unjammed it. It took him 30 seconds, and he charged me $80. And I happily paid him that $80, because do you know how many times I've done that now where I haven't had to call a plumber, right? And so we take action. I got myself into a situation where I had no idea what I was doing. I had to pay for it, and I had to pay for an expert's time. But now that was 20 years ago, and for the past 20 years, I've probably done that 15 times, and I've fixed the garbage disposal myself. And that's just a little story of learning as we go. But what I'm primarily looking for is value add. And what value add means is a situation where the property as it current stands, there's something I can do to it that will add a lot of value. And ideally, it's something I can do that is not super difficult. The more difficult and the more time it takes, the more risk for me. So an example might be, I'll give you an easy one on an apartment building. On an apartment building, we identified that it had a lot of closet space in these apartments, but it had no laundry in the apartments. It had common laundry rooms. And we figured out that if we ran some plumbing to one of the closets in the apartments, we could add a washer and a dryer into each apartment. And everyone knows that if you have your washer and dryer in your apartment, it's so much more desirable than going down to that, community laundry room where someone might take your stuff in the dryer and throw it on the floor. And so we ran the pricing to add it. How much does it cost to add? How much value will that add to the apartment? And how quick to get our money back from adding it. So if it's $1,000 to add and we know it's going to get us an additional $75 a month, well, we're almost getting our money back just in the first year of after we've done it, right? After we've spent that $1,000, the rent goes up $75 a month. The first year we're getting that money back. Then after that, it's all gravy. It's all profit. And so there's different things. If it's a home you're going to live in, maybe you can add a bathroom into the current, the easiest way to add a bathroom, if it's in the current footprint of the house, you don't have to build out into the yard and get all kinds of approvals. Maybe there's a way to do it, or to change the layout on a property. Just now, what we did is we ripped down a wall and opened the kitchen up. So now you have an ocean view from the kitchen. So there's different things like that where ripping a wall down sounds complicated, but it wasn't. We were able to do it and get approval just with our engineer contractor guy to add a beam, a support beam. You want to check that out so the ceiling doesn't fall. But just different things like that where you can add value to the property.
Yeah. Our family growing up has done this, but they haven't done it for investment properties to rent and stuff. It's their personal properties. And every house I've lived in throughout my whole life, we've moved in and fixed up over the course of 3 or 4 years, sell the property, move to another property, do the same thing. And so I've seen that in my own life from my parents' example, but they never took the leap of doing it in an investment way and having tenants, more than maybe they had a duplex at one point and it burned them a little bit. And because of that, they never really did it again. I think they kind of like touched the fire and was like, nope, not really interested in that. What are your thoughts on buying to hold or buying to flip? We just did a property in Nome. A buddy of mine had a outside investor. He got the capital to pay 100% down, and we flipped it over the course of a summer. And I don't think the profit margin was that good. I think he made a little money, but it was almost more work than worth. Do you invest in flips or do you invest in long-term rentals?
Yeah, good question. I've done all of them. I've done them in different states. I've done both buy and holds and flips in different states. And I'll say this, flipping is really hard work. It's really intense. You have to be on top of your numbers. You have to be on top of your time frame. Your crew has to be really skilled. And it's not as forgiving as buying and holding, or what you were saying your family did. The most forgiving is the model, the first one you ran through with your family growing up, is if you're going to buy a home to move into and you can identify ways to add value to it. If you make some mistakes there, it's okay, right? They'll iron out over time. You can iron them out, whatever. If you're flipping, you've got a time frame, you've got a window. Your money is costing you to, that time is costing you money. And any mistake that you make is also costing you money, and that's coming off of your profit that you're going to make. And so it's much more intensive. It's much more involved. And then with buy and holds, there is as well more forgiveness. Sometimes what we'll do is we'll go into a flip, or at least I've seen people do this. It's rare I've done this, but you'll go into a flip and maybe you've spent too much money, or you're not able to sell it for the price point you want to. You might be able to transition it into a hold. So you can also run those numbers. We often do that, where you'll run the numbers, say, okay, well, let's go into this as a flip and see if we can get out of it and make a quick profit. But if not, what would it look like if we rented it? And if both situations look good, well, then that's a pretty good situation, right? Because you've got two exit strategies, both of which could be profitable. Buy and hold is where you build wealth. So if you know anyone that's owned real estate for more than 10, 20 years, they've built wealth with it, right? And as long as you don't screw it up or, pull too much money out of it or whatever, if you're conservative, you buy it right, you pay that mortgage down, or you have someone else pay it down for you by renting it out, and you hold it for a long period of time, you're going to build wealth. Flipping does not necessarily build wealth. Flipping can create capital. It can create returns for you. It can put money in your bank account, but that's not wealth. Wealth is building assets that increase in value over time and put money back in your pocket. And so that's some of the big differences to me.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think that's really good advice. I wanted to talk to you. I mean, I guess this will sort of parlay into wealth generation, but I wanted to talk to you about people who maybe want to start looking into investing nowadays. So obviously the early part of your story was in, I guess, what you would look at today and call a pretty prime time for buying homes. $180,000 for anything in Los Angeles at this point is not even a doable conversation. And so, I mean, God, you couldn't even stay in a friend's room for that probably. And so, but I wonder if we could talk a little bit about just sort of, how the environment's changed. And as far as it pertains to wealth generation, the old adage, the buy low, the sell high, I don't know that those opportunities exist today. And maybe there's such a thing as these houses that are all overpriced now becoming worth more. But it seems like there's probably more of a dip in the future than there is a giant, or a giant, growth. So maybe it's better to wait or whatever. I don't know. But maybe you could talk a little bit about the strategy of getting started investing today.
Love it. Absolutely. Yeah. Unaffordability is an issue right now, right? Nationwide. And then when you're on the coast, especially where I am on the coast, California, it's an extreme issue. And then you have interest rates that are high. You have an environment where prices are high and interest rates are high. And a lot of people are just like, I'm out. Like, I'm just going to wait. I'm going to sit on the sidelines. Right. And as an investor, I love that. To be honest with you, the more people that are out of the game, the better for me. And I'm just being blunt. I'm being honest. I flourish in environments where it's the most, and it's a Warren Buffett saying, right? Be greedy when other people are fearful, and be fearful when other people are greedy. And that, I think another one of his sayings is, when there's blood in the streets, that's when it's the best time to buy. And I really have seen that in the market cycles over the past few decades. Is some of the best opportunities to buy is when there's the most discouragement in the market. And so then the question is, okay, well, that's all cute, Alan. How do you buy when prices are high and interest rates are high? And I would say it's a skill set. I mean, what we do in real estate investing is very much a skill set, like any other skill set. And so you learn strategies and you adapt to the market that you're in, and you figure out what are the strategies and what are the skills that work. And so in a market where prices are high and interest rates are high, you adapt and possibly use creative financing is one strategy. So the property I'm in right now in Santa Barbara, we had the seller finance it. And I bought this property 5 years ago, but at the time I was leveraged heavily into an apartment building construction project. I had multiple things going on, And I did not look good to a bank because I had so much money going out into development. And we found this property. And at the time, I got to be honest with you, I was like, it's not a good market to buy in. It's just too hot. Prices are high. It's same old, same old. And this property was really, really run down. And it was, just to be honest with you, almost $1 million. And I'm like, I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. I'm from the Midwest. So I get it. And I'm scratching my head going, I can't believe I'm going to pay $1 million for a property that most people would just bulldoze and tear it down. But we saw the potential. It had a guest house that could be fixed up. It had, all kinds of potential, had a decent piece of land. And we asked the seller to finance us, and he agreed. And so I didn't have to even use a bank. I literally made my monthly payments to him, like paying rent. The down payment I got from selling another property, but I had a private party lend me the down payment temporarily while I sold the other property because I needed it quickly. So I explained to them, hey, look, I'm selling that property over there. And they could clearly see that there was value in the property I was selling. They lended me the down payment to give to the seller. So I essentially bought this property with zero down. I eventually pulled the money in and paid off that private party from selling the other property. But the initial purchase was zero down because I pulled money from a private party for the down payment. And then I made monthly payments to the seller like he was the bank and negotiated it with him. And it was amazing that it worked out that way because I could negotiate anything. When you deal with a lender, you don't get that much negotiation. When the seller's financing, we negotiated what the payment would be. There was no appraisal. Now some sellers will do this, but he didn't pull my credit. He didn't check my tax returns, nothing. He just knew that he was getting his down payment, which was 20% down, and that he was going to get a monthly check. And I explained it to him. I said, hey, it's a win for you because not only am I going to give you your purchase price, but you're going to get interest on top of it. And you're going to get a monthly check that'll just be interest. And he liked that. He was 80 years old. He owned the property free and clear, which is an ideal seller finance situation, as someone who's owned the property for a while. And he loved the fact that we were going to fix it up. We weren't going to bulldoze it. It was like an old California farmhouse. And so we told him we liked the charm to it and we were going to restore it. And he loved that story. And so there's just different skills that you can develop to work in the current market that you're in. But the discouragement in the market as an investor gets me excited. The hardest market I've ever been in was like, the one 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, where there's 20 offers on every property. I couldn't buy anything. I just couldn't even compete. I'd submit an offer and they wouldn't even like acknowledge that I existed. And so that's the worst market for me. The best market is the more people sitting on the bench, the better.
Right. Well, so it seems like, there's, signs of foreclosures coming. There's, obviously going to be some sort of correction around this whole economy that we've got going right now. But I guess back on that sort of wealth generation point, like, when you could buy a house for 180,000 and then sell it, 25 years later for $1 million, there's some serious wealth to be generated. When you're buying houses, a $500,000 house for $700,000, and that's the whole market. Like, do those houses actually continue to appreciate beyond, do they ever actually become worth what they are in a hyper priced market? In which case, like, if you owned 10 houses that are all overvalued and then eventually they dip, would you actually build wealth? I guess what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's a good question. So you really do want to be careful, of over leveraging yourself, right? And so you want to be conservative. And again, you want to buy right, you want to pay down and hold. And that's where you create wealth. And so paying down the mortgage, having that cushion, like I did exactly what you're describing happened to me. So I bought in 2006 an apartment building in Oklahoma. And then I also bought another apartment building in 2007 in Texas. Those were both kind of at the exact peak of the real estate market because I fortunately sold in California in the peak, but I also bought in the peak in those two states. And so then 2008, 9, and 10 happened and real estate market bombs, and people were concerned for me because they're like, hey, we know you bought those apartment buildings. How's it going? And for me, I said, it doesn't matter. Even if they've gone down in value, I don't care because I'm not selling right now. What I'm looking at is the income on the property, and the rents didn't go down at all. And you'll find that during a recession, rents might go down a little bit, but rent doesn't go down that much. So rent is always a cushion. It's always kind of pushing, holding some sort of stability to the real estate market, because you can run those numbers. You can say, okay, well, what if I buy this property, and what if worst case scenario, the market does go down, which I don't see anything happening that soon. We can talk about the future. But if the market does go down, you want to ask yourself that, then what are my exit strategies? What could I rent it for? And is that amount enough to cover my bases, or at least get me in a position where I can hold on if I need to hold on? If that rental amount is way too low and you're going to be bleeding every month, and let's say you have to move, you have a job transition or life change and you have to move out of that property, and you're going to be bleeding every month, then maybe it's not the right investment, right? And that's, I think, what you're kind of referring to is, what if things go wrong? And you want to run those scenarios. I love running worst case scenarios. I think that's part of being a smart investor, is shooting holes through your strategy. My wife's brother worked for SpaceX, and he's a computer programmer, and his whole job was to take the code that they were putting together to launch these rockets and try to find holes in it. Just try to hack it and find errors in the code. And I love that thought process, to think, okay, well, here's my idea, and maybe bounce it off of mentors or people that are smarter than you and say, hey, what could go wrong here? And what could I do if something does go wrong? Because something could, right? And so it's nice to have those strategies in place.
So in the current market, we're dealing with inflation. And if you can budget your numbers to where your rent income, the passive income that's coming in from, say, your apartment complex, kind of, you're making money even with the high interest rate. Is that a problem to have the high interest rate? Because eventually you could just refinance and get it down. So should you be scared right now about the high interest rate in investing in properties?
Oh, man. Yeah, see, you're shooting that bullet hole right in there. And that is a major risk right now. And some people are losing their apartment buildings right now. That is an area that's interesting to look at, because what's happened is, let's say they bought an apartment building 5 years ago, and they had a 5-year fixed rate that was low. And now that rate is resetting, and it's jumping up to a much higher rate. And now all of a sudden, the income coming in is not covering even their mortgage payment, much less their maintenance and their taxes. And so some of those people are going to walk away from the apartment building because they just can't continue to bleed. They can't afford the bleed on it. And you're right. That is an area of vulnerability you have to pay attention to. So there's an investment I saw recently where this colleague of mine was buying an apartment building, and it already had financing in place that you could assume. So you could take it over, and it was like a 3% interest rate, and it was fixed for the next 10 years. And so that's a good situation, right? But there's other situations where you just have to be careful, because if that interest rate can be adjustable at a certain time, then you need to watch out, because it could come back and harm you.
Yeah. So I would personally, I don't think I'd ever put myself in a position to be on an ARM or an adjustable rate kind of thing. I would want something fixed. If I was going into something fixed and it's like real high, like I don't know what's current rates right now,
like high sixes,
even if it was like 9% or 10% or whatever. If you could do the math and figure out that at 9 or 10% you're still making a profit, and you get a fixed mortgage for 8, it doesn't really matter, does it? Because if you're making the profit with the places rented, the high interest rate doesn't matter to that extent. It's just getting into an ARM situation that's going to adjust after 5 years, and then your math goes off. Is that what you
Correct.
need to? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a saying that you're dating the interest rate and you're marrying the property. So your interest rate is a temporary situation, right? So if you are running your numbers, you use the number 8, you're running your numbers on a property and you've got an 8% interest rate on it, which is high. And maybe that's a private money interest rate, like a construction loan or a private money party. Excuse me. And that that is kind of like gravy in the future, because there's lots of ways you could lower that interest rate in the future. Interest rates are not always going to be high. They will eventually go down. So if you're able to, at least break even or make some money at that 8% rate right now, well, imagine if in 2 years you get that rate down to 6 or 5 or 4.5. It's like, boom, your income's going to jump way up in a few years. And it's worth it to grab it now, because you might get a better deal on that property right now because of the interest rates, right? So you might pay a significant percentage less for it now than what it would be worth in a few years when the interest rates are at 5 or 4.5. And so I think that's a good play. And that's something to definitely watch for, is don't pay too much attention to the interest rate, that you just cancel out everything where you actually could have a really good deal that could make you money now and even more money in the future.
Yeah, I think that's smart. And maybe it's one of the things that's really the difference between like an investing strategy versus like just buying a house to live in kind of strategy, is looking at things that way. I mean, I guess it's more like how you would buy stocks even, right? I mean, you're kind of betting on the future value of these things. And the one unique thing about the house is that eventually you could own it outright, and basically whatever you make on it, either as a sale or in rent, basically you can continue to generate income off that thing. So I think that's really smart, and it actually sort of fills in the gaps on my earlier question about sort of the value of houses and things like that. I mean, even if the house was to lose value, ultimately you'll still own it, and you'll have an asset that's worth X, whatever that is. And you string together enough $500,000 houses, then you've got some a little nest egg there. So even if you bought high and maybe lost on a couple, I mean, ultimately you still have that asset at the end. That's maybe the big differentiator. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, so especially in this market, and maybe this is me being naive, but with interest rates and all the stuff you hear in the news about it becoming more and more difficult to get money, especially maybe for first-time home buyers or maybe first-time investors. One idea that runs through people's heads is maybe leveraging the property they live in, pulling out some equity, much like you have done in the past, and using that equity to try and buy something else. And I wondered if you would just talk about that as a strategy in the first place, if it's smart, if it's too risky to, put your primary residence on something like that, or if that's a reasonable way to get started.
Yeah. Yeah, it's both smart and can be risky, right? So it depends on the situation. I think that ultimately you've just got to have the end goal in mind. And the end goal is to buy properties right. So buy them smart. In other words, you're getting a good deal, you can add value. And then your next goal after buying it is to pay the debt down. So you don't want to always be just leveraging everything to the hilt and just have, barely any equity in anything. Your goal is to always figure out how to get the debt down, and then hold and hold for as long as you can. I look back and there's properties that I sold where I'm like, man, I wish I still owned that property,
Every day.
So it's really just, I wish I just would have rented that out and held on to it even through the storm, right? Even though things were hard, because now it's worth a lot more. And so that you want to just keep that in mind. Can you pull equity out of a property? Absolutely. Do you want to be careful with doing it? Absolutely. You typically, when you're going to pull equity out, sometimes it'll be an adjustable rate. So you got to really watch for that. So try to get a fixed rate. When you have an equity line, you're always looking for ways to pay it off or pay it down, because typically an equity line will be a higher interest rate. And so what you can do is you move that money, equity in one property into another, right? Let's say you pull out the equity line on the first property and you put it into a second property. Then hopefully you bought right and you're adding value and you've done some things at that property. Then you can get it reappraised and you can refinance that property and with the refinance, take some money out that pays off that equity line. And now you've got it in really long-term stable debt, right? 30-year fixed interest rate. And again, I know the interest rates are a little higher right now. So I would have my mind on two things. One is either negotiating for the seller to pay down the interest rate. You can have them buy down your interest rate, or just realize that I'm probably going to be in this higher interest rate for 1 to 2 years, and then I'm going to be able to refinance. Most people looking at the interest rates right now are agreeing that we're in a period of maybe another year, maybe 2, but that's not as likely, where interest rates, we would consider to be high. And then at some point, they're going to come back down. My concern as an investor is I think a lot of people are waiting for them to come back down. And when they do, the market may heat back up again in terms of how many offers show up to compete with. And so I kind of like this season right now. Over the next year, I'm pretty bullish on finding opportunity where someone is sitting on a property they're trying to sell and they're not getting any offers. And so I can negotiate all kinds of angles. I can negotiate price. I can negotiate terms. I can maybe negotiate creative financing. I can do all kinds of things that might make it work for me as an opportunity.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, like we mentioned, I think there's going to be a lot of, foreclosure and things like that in the future, or in the nearest future. So it seems like, the big problem that we ran into about a year ago, where there was just nothing on the market, or like you were saying earlier, where you had to, you were one of 50 offers on a place, that sort of era, it feels like is maybe going to be behind us, at least for the time being. So it may be, despite cruddy interest rates, it may actually be a good time to buy.
Yeah, it could be if you can figure out a way. Again, I just feel like, for me personally, I'm always shopping, because it's kind of like people, so many people are really good at shopping for deals, way better than me. They just, I don't know how they do it. These people like in your life that are like, hey, I found this, whatever they found, car or chair or furniture, and they just find incredible deals. And I'm just like, how do you always find all these deals? They're probably just always looking and always shopping. And real estate's the same way. It's the exact same concept. It's like, man, how do some of these investors they're always, finding these deals and making money no matter what the market? It's just because they're always looking. And it doesn't cost anything to look at real estate. It doesn't cost anything to tour with a real estate agent, to look at properties, to just be flat out honest with people. Hey, we're just looking, we're learning, we're going to pull the trigger at some point, but I'm out here looking. And it's fun to look at real estate, and you learn stuff. And so that's one of the things I've learned, is to always be looking. My wife's really good at it. She loves looking at real estate. And sometimes that's frustrating, because she's like, oh, let's do that. She gets so many ideas, let's do this, let's do that. Oh, we should buy this. But, I'm just like, but every once in a while, she just hits it out of the park, right? She found this one that we're in. And I was kind of more of the Debbie Downer on it. And then when I came and I really ran the numbers, I'm like, oh my gosh, this could work really good. So yeah, always be looking.
So where do you look? Do you look on Zillow? Do you look on the Craigslist ad? Do you look on your local real estate agent, develop that network and go from there? I know I've read the Rich Dad Poor Dad book and all that stuff. And he said every day he would go for a walk, and on his walk, he would look at what's around, and, oh, that building's been vacant for a year. And then he'd do research on that, because that building has been vacant. Do you have any tips and tricks as far as finding properties that might help?
Oh man, it's one of the things I enjoy the most. It's probably one of the things I'm the best at, is finding. I'm like a bird dog. So I'm just going to think about it, but everything you just said, yes. so I mean, you know what I mean? I'm looking like the person that's, again, let's go back to the person that's finding deals shopping. They're looking at thrift stores. They're looking at Facebook Marketplace. They're looking at Craigslist. They're looking at Ross, and they're in Goodwill. Then they're looking at the high end stores, and they're shopping on the internet and blah, blah, blah. They're looking everywhere. And so in real estate, it's the same. Like I'm looking everywhere. Sometimes there's even little things like people that are having estate sales and garage sales. I'd say 30% of the time they're going to be selling their home, right?
Oh,
So
yeah.
there's little tricks that I've learned over the years. Like I'll go to a garage sale or estate sale and say, "Are you moving?" And sometimes they'll be like, yeah, we're moving out of state. And, "Oh, really? You're going to be selling the property?" And just starts a conversation. So there's all kinds of avenues that you can look, and all of them can work. So I wouldn't say there's one that's like the gold mine. It's really just sourcing all of them and finding a way to have fun with it.
Yeah. We're almost to that time. But I want to ask one more question in regards to, when you find that one or that deal, what kind of numbers do you run mentally to make sure it's a good deal?
Yeah, good question. I run numbers, so all different angles. So I want to run numbers on, of course, what could I buy it for? What does it need? How much work would I need to put into it? And that comes with experience, right? So as you take action and you do projects and make some mistakes, we all make mistakes as we take action. You learn, and then so what does the property need to get it to the point where I want to get it? And then what are all these different maybe exit strategies, even though one of them may be me moving into it is an exit strategy. But then even moving into it, again, I like running those worst case scenarios. Well, what if all of a sudden I have to move out? What if something goes wrong? What if something goes right? What if I get a job promotion to another state, or, whatever situation people are in? So you can run the numbers of what would it be worth fixed up if you had to sell it? What would it be worth if it was fixed up and you had to rent it? I think those are the two big lanes that you're going to look at. And, then you can basically see your risk from there. And you want to leave a cushion, of course, in all of your numbers. And you can get second opinions. You can get a realtor's opinion. You can get other investors' opinion or your mentor's opinion. And then really just shore in your numbers and feel confident to be able to move forward on that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I wanted to ask you one last thing real fast too, and it's just totally an aside. I'm not even sure if you do commercial real estate investing, but all you're hearing in the news these days is that, people don't want to go back to the office. There's more vacancy than ever. The cost of commercial real estate could be plummeting. What do you think the future of commercial real estate is?
Yeah. Oh, I love this. This is a whole nother conversation.
Pickleball. Yeah.
Everything will become an indoor pickleball. That'll be the future.
To me, there's fascinating stuff going on in commercial real estate. So there's the office apocalypse, right? Where, so many office buildings are just sitting empty because, post-COVID, people just want to work where they want to work. And a lot of companies are providing that flexibility. And so we have office spaces just sitting vacant all across the country. And now you've got landlords that are struggling to pay their mortgage. And so they're calling it the office apocalypse. And that is definitely going to be something to watch. That's a factor for our economy. And then there's talk about what's going to happen with this empty office space. It's really probably not all going to just fill back up. Companies aren't going to be like, all right, we're sick of this. Everyone get back to work. Now everyone's in the office, right? It's just not going to happen. So they're talking about converting office to, and you're already seeing some of this starting to happen in cities, but converting some of that office into residential because we have a housing shortage. But that's not easy to do when a building was built for office to all of a sudden convert it to residential. So that's complicated, but that's a space to watch. Retail is an interesting space to watch. Retail's been hit for, many, many years now because of the whole online retail presence. And so retail is transitioning to more of an experience-based retail. We no longer have the Radio Shacks where you go and buy your widgets. Your widgets now, you just buy all of them online. So retail is becoming more of an experience. It's like now you go to a retail location and you throw axes, or you drink drinks, or you taste wine, or you're having cider or food, or you're building a bear if you're a kid, or it's just all this stuff where it's an experience-based thing. But when these transitions happen, a lot of spaces go empty, a lot of landlords struggle, and there's opportunity for investors to come in and breathe new life into a property. But the biggest one right now is office, and that's a space to watch, because how is that going to affect our economy? How is it going to affect the banks? How many of these properties are going to go under? How difficult is it going to be to transition them to residential? Just a lot of big questions there that are yet to be answered, but it is interesting.
Yeah, no, thanks for your insights on that. Yeah, I think it'll be really interesting to see what happens. And yeah, I'm not smart enough to know what the next step for those places are, so I don't know what it'll be, but it'll be interesting to watch for sure.
Yeah.
So cool. So as we're kind of getting here to the last couple minutes, do you want to give people a quick place that they can look you up, they can learn more about the work you do, or maybe engage with you if they wanted to?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm on YouTube. I have a website. My nickname's Al Siebes. It's ALS like Sam, IE like Edward, B like boy, S like Sam, Al Siebes, and short for my full name, Alan Siebenaler. And I am on YouTube as well under Al Siebes, and I do this. I just talk about real estate. I tell people stories. I love to teach through stories and things I've done right, mistakes I've made, all that good stuff. So, but thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I also think that you mentioned that you may have a podcast coming soon. I don't know if it's too soon.
Yes.
To plug it.
Oh yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, it hasn't launched yet. It's going to launch, I think, in the next month or so. We've already pre-recorded 5 episodes. It's called The California Real Estate Investor. And I'm so excited about it because it's this space in real estate investing in California where most gurus in real estate investing they hate California, to be honest with you. They're like, I would never invest there. And I get it. Like, prices are too high and this and that, and it's too liberal, or whatever their reason, tenants have more rights than landlords, whatever their reason, they don't want to invest here. And I've been investing here for 22 years and I've done well. I've seen other people that have done incredibly well. And so we're unpacking stories of real estate investors that have focused on California and what they've done, the mistakes they made and the successes they've had. And so it's a lot of fun. I'm excited about it.
That's awesome. Well, yeah. So anyway, thanks so much, Alan. We really appreciate taking the time to do this. I think it was really good insights and answered a few of my little personal questions that I'd written down here. So thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Talk to you guys soon.
And thanks so much to everybody who tunes into the show this week and every week. We'll see you guys next time.